Hello and welcome. In this video, I wanted to share with you the process of making this doodle using a dip pen and some ink. What I love about using a dip pen is, well, it's such a wonderful tool to play around with. Usually you see calligraphers using dip pens and it can be intimidating because the skill level that they're at might make you think that using a dip pen requires a lot of practice. Now, obviously to make calligraphy, you need a lot of practice, but to doodle with a dip pen, you don't need a lot of practice. You just need a nib holder, and some ink. You might be asking yourself, why would I doodle with a dip pen as opposed to just with a regular pen or a marker? There are many answers to that question. A dip pen allows you to get more variation in your lines. When you press harder on the nib, the tines of the nib separate and they create a thicker line. And different nibs create different lines. A pen is a lot more limited as a tool in terms of the line quality. Sometimes I use pens that are very limited in line quality, like technical pens, but sometimes you want to mix it up and try something else. Another great thing about using a dip pen is something called shading. What happens is sometimes you're applying a lot of ink and sometimes you're applying a little bit of ink. That creates a thicker or a thinner layer of ink on the paper. Where the ink is thick, it'll be darker. Where the ink is thin, it'll be lighter. So in this doodle, I'm able to see different shades of the ink on the paper. So it adds a little bit of interest to the doodle. You can see that the blue is darker in some areas and lighter in others. Another thing I love about using a dip pen is just that tactile experience that you get with the ink. In some cases, when you're applying ink to the paper, you're basically applying a pool of ink and then you're pulling that pool of ink to cover different areas of the paper. And you don't really get that experience with a pen or a marker. I love using a dip pen because it reminds me that anything you use to doodle or to draw is just a tool. You could use a stick and ink, and there you go. That's a tool for drawing or doodling. And when you use a pen, you start to ask yourself, well, what does this tool give me? Where does it limit me? And where does it help me? Sometimes if the tool limits you, that's a good thing, because sometimes maybe you want to experiment with a tool that always creates a consistent line, for example, like a technical pen. For me, using a dip pen is a lot of fun in terms of learning about the different tools and learning about the history of pens and the various types of pens that are out there, including technical pens, ballpoint pens, roller balls, fountain pens. I'm a real geek when it comes to all those things, and I love learning about the technology inside the pens, when they were invented, what they were used for historically, and so on. From a doodling perspective or a drawing perspective, I love using different tools because sometimes when I use the same tool on the same paper, sitting in the same place, I just seem to be drawing the same things. At least from my point of view, how I feel when I'm doodling, I feel like my eyes are new or refreshed and I can go to new places. Sometimes for me, going to new places means going back to old places that I used to be at and I abandoned. So using a dip pen is a way for me to connect with who I was and what I used to do, what I used to draw when I drew with a dip pen, and also to forget the automatic habits that I have when I use different tools. In terms of dexterity, it does take a little bit more attention because if you press too hard on your nib, you can't push the nib forward. If you press hard on a ballpoint pen, you can push it in every direction on the page because it's just a ball rolling on the page. But the way that the dip pen is made, it's not meant to be pressed on and pushed. It can be pressed on and pulled. And another beautiful thing about this kind of doodle using ink is that you can feel it in the end, because once it dries, you can actually feel the lines on the page. As opposed to using a fine liner or a technical pen, you can feel the ink on the page, but not as much as with using a dip pen and ink. This was a really fun doodle for me to make. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and share on social media. Subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I will see you next time.